Hey, family, this is me, Bishop John Selders, and this, once again, is another installment in what we have come to call Relevant Conversations with the Bishop. I am so pleased to join you and join you in this venue, this medium, this platform. Technology is a thing, ain't it? We could just do these kinds of things. Don't need a whole lot of help. I'm of course, I'm glad for every piece of help I get from those who work behind the scenes. Thank you very much for my crack team that helped me do what it is that I do. And tonight, Lord have mercy, tonight. This I'm on cloud 9, 10, and 12, and 15. Somebody very dear and near to me is going to be joining us tonight. And let me talk just a little bit about this traveler, this sojourner, and this very important person, not only to me and to the family. She is also very dear and very important to the life of the denomination. I have spent 30 plus years hanging in and around. So let me just tell you, she is the daughter and now the patriarch of our family in many ways. She's the second oldest of the clan, the children. I know way too much about her and the family. I'm a part of the family. I'm gonna just tell you, I'm a part of the family. And clan, Delk clan, don't you forget it. I'm a part of the family. You see. Let me move on so I can get her on. She is the first ordained woman, Black woman, of the United Church of Christ. She was the first woman, and she was the second woman to ever be even nominated to the post of president and general minister of the denomination. She went on from that nomination while she lost. It was to the larger churches, chagrin. They picked somebody else, and we ain't gonna hate on who they did pick. We ain't gonna hate on him. He was all right. But what it did do is allow Mom Yvonne to go to listen. She went on to Chicago and was the first woman and the first person of color to lead the Community Renewal Society, one of these large, big, important parachurch organizations in the city of Chicago, before she retired formally. Now, she ain't really retired because she's been out there on the line all this whole time. That's been 20 plus years ago, her retirement. Let me just say this to you. For the last 30 years, so that really literally the last half of my life. If there's been something major or minor in my life, ministry, and career, she's had a hand in it. She's had something to say about it, whether I listened to it or not. She had something to say about it. Whether I asked or not, she was going to have an opinion about it, and I've appreciated every opinion she's given me, every gift she's given me. She allowed me for the last little bit of her time in Chicago to join her staff, and then she strategically placed me right next door to her office. And she would call out, "John, can you come in here for a moment?" And she said, "Shut the door." And I knew we was gonna have some chit chat about something that was important and significant. She hails from Norfolk, Virginia. She is the daughter of Marcus Senior and Mama Cora Delk. Let me bring to this platform my mama, my spirit mama. I'll tell you a secret. Her and my biological mother, they have birthdays a day apart. That's how tight and close she is. She the same sign as my mama. She acts so much like that. I can't hardly tell the difference at times. And I now don't. It is just my deep honor to bring my spirit mama to this platform. Would y'all help me welcome the Reverend Dr. Yvonne V. Delk? Come on in the room, mama. How you doing?
I am absolutely delighted to be with you on this show. And let me just say, I think God sends people in our lives both for a reason and a season. And so from the moment that you and Pamela entered my life, I knew that we were going to be on a journey, and that journey was going to be standing for justice wherever we were, standing for freedom wherever we were, being willing to fight the fight and not even to think about what it would mean in terms of the various positions. I might be the executive and you might be my staff, but when we were working, we were family, working
That's
together
right.
on those issues. And I always was grateful to God that now I'm in my 84th year of life, that while I never had biologically any sons and daughters, God sent me spiritual sons and daughters that have been so significant to my life. So I'm absolutely delighted to be with you on this show and just having some time to talk together about what it has meant for us to be together on a journey.
That's right. I too. I reflect back. I was telling you earlier, and I'll tell you all who are listening. I happened to come to Chicago for a meeting or something, and I was at your place, and I was having some drama. If you've never lived and had drama, I don't know if you're living. Anyway, I'm gonna just say that right there and let that go. What you did, we sat down at the table, kitchen table, and we just talked. You let me just babble on and carry on. And after we finished talking, and a couple hours later, I felt better, and in fact was ready to go on back to St. Louis at the time and go ahead on and face what it was I had to face. All right, and it has been. You've allowed me over the years to be on your coattail and travel the country. If you had a spot, I knew I always had a spot, and you would always say, "Okay, son, get your calendar out. I need you to come be with me for a couple of days, wherever you were." And I have, with your opening the door, have you supported my ministry, supported the initiatives that I've been in, that have been important to me. One of them gang summits, you on my coat. I was on your coattail right in the midst of it, and then you said, "Well, where did you go?" I said, "Well, I was out there with Pookie and Reverend and them. They took me around the corner." I wasn't. I would listen. My view to you wasn't too far, but I was out there, and you said, "Go do what the Lord told you to do." I have been blessed immensely with what you and your name, your significant status in the church and in justice world. I mean, it's a small group of folk, and for me to say, do you know my mama?
Yeah.
And if they would say, I'd say Yvonne Delk, they say, okay, and the waters would part.
Yeah. And I just want you to know, it runs both ways. I've never had to pick up that phone and call you without your responding.
Yes,
It meant
ma'am.
that whatever was on your calendar, whatever you were into, you made room and space to be able to stand with me, both professionally when we were working with some big issues in terms of the cities and the places and the church that we were part of, but also personally. So that when I had to say to you, I got a nephew that I want you to say a word to that would benefit from your uh, connecting to him. And he remembers, Troy remembers to this very day having conversations with you that helped him on his path and the journey that he was flowing with. And the fact that you were able to come for his wedding and to be able to play in the context of that wedding meant so much. So it was both personal and professional. It flowed both ways, is what I'm saying. When you're family, you know you're going to be there for one another. And sometimes we never have those relationships. I'm just grateful that we did and continue to have that kind of relationship.
Yes, ma'am. Of course. Of course. It is. It is. Um, um, it's, it's rare. I can just say that it's rare when you connect to folk in that deep, that kind of deep centered way, and you know it. You know when that connection is real. You know when that connection is solid. You know
Right.
when that connection transcends.
Right.
And I don't take it for granted. And the older I get, now I know it ain't everybody you connect to in that kind of way. It's
And,
not every person's.
and let's also say, too, for the sake of speaking truth to power, that there have been moments where we have had to have conversations that were difficult. It wasn't like an easy path all of the times. I think about that time when we were in Chicago and things were going, and I was in one place, you and Pam were in another place, and it felt like we were not in sync with one another. And we called for time out. It was important for us to have some time out to find that space where we could really confront each other with where the other was coming from, where we were standing, my position on that, your position. So it wasn't like we were always flowing in the same sync at times. Sometimes you saw the issue a little different than I have. I mean, I'm your mother figure, you're my son figure, intergenerational. You see it, you come at it from another perspective. And I'm glad we were able, even in those moments when it was difficult for us, because we were speaking truth to each other. And the truth that we were speaking, each of us were feeling very solid on that ground that we were standing on.
Mhm.
And it could have been something that could have disconnected us for a lifetime. But because we were family and because of the love that we shared for each other, we know we had to sit and work this thing out and find a way that we could continue to move together on the journey. So I'm also grateful for not only the wonderful times that we've had, but for those moments where we really have had to confront each other when we've seen something in a different way and where our whole way of being and functioning was different. But we found that ground. We kept coming back to the table, kept sitting down with each other, kept wrestling with it, which allowed us then to keep moving together in a strong, strong way. And I'm grateful for that as well.
Thank you for raising it. It is. So can we just be honest? Relationships ain't just hunky dory. Who we, you know, what they call unicorns and rainbows. If you really do have relationship, then it means that you got to be authentic, and honesty comes with that kind of sense of, listen, here's where I'm at, here's where you at, and we might be a part of it.
Right.
And we were able to do that, and I've also appreciated your willingness to say, okay, I might be wrong on it, because now that I get old, I ain't wrong on much.
You hold fast. You hold
Right.
fast to that ground that you're standing on. Hold fast to that. You've come a long way to get to that particular place in time.
That's right. But and you will hold you hold your position,
No.
and yet also know you talking to me
Yeah.
means that I need to see what you're talking about. And that's what relationship actually really means. It's not just when we need each other in the low times where it's kind of easy to be on one be with on a one accord. It's when we're not necessarily seeing it in the same spaces, in the same places, and that we can bring ourselves to the center. I love what you name as the table.
Yeah.
You come to the table, come to the, you call it the rock. There's the space and place.
Yeah.
And then then the book says, come, let us reason together, right? It's at that moment. And sometimes it ain't about a whole lot of talking. It's about centering in and around how we feeling. It's being honest about that, and then naming those things, being very, very, very clear to name it, and then let's just work through with love. Then how much more, the book says, does love abound in that space?
Right. And we're living in a time which is such a deep divide in the country, a deep divide in the nation, a deep divide among families at times, a deep divide among us, even in the church settings that we are a part of. And the question is, when you find yourself in that place of deep divide, rather than to look at the other as that which you need to position yourself over and against, or to look at the other as something that you've got to protect yourself from or defend yourself from. It is different when you look at the other as my son. You look at me, I'm your mother. You look at us in relationship to each other. And even though we're facing a difficult situation in terms of how we're going to find our way together, the relationship that we have is so meaningful that it keeps us from backing away from each other. You keep staying at it. You keep working at it to find the place. And sometimes I'm not going to change the way you think. You may not change. And I have to give you room and space to be able to walk in your truth, just as you have to give me. But because there are fundamental things at work in that relationship, it holds the relationship. It means that I'm willing to stay. I'm willing to be committed, and you are too. And for me, it is, in fact, the fact that we affirm the fact that as mother, son, we are family. We are family. And in the family, there means that relationship still trumps. That relationship keeps us coming back to each other. We are also persons of faith. And that faith component that we have that anchors who we are is really critical. And the other piece of it for me is we know we're living in a world where we got to fight for justice and freedom each and every day. That the realities that are confronting us on every level, whether it's at a political level, a social level of the church, the issues that we are struggling with in our nation that tends to define what it means for us to be in this world means, and for us to be African American fighting in the context of a nation that continues to embody racism, continues to embody a sense of a affirmation that you are not as good as I am. And right now it's just unbelievable to me that we're trying to whitewash history. It's unbelievable to me that I'm living in a state, where a governor, has got this critical race piece going, and where teachers can even spy on each other if they teach the truth about the history that we are a part of. And so when you live in the context of a system that day for day for day for day is constantly trying to deny your sense of being, your sense of worth, your sense of value, that we got to find a way that we can come together to continue to work for that world that we think God intends, to work for the kind of existence where all people matter, but especially Black Lives Matter in the midst of that. And so there's an anchor there, is what I'm saying, that keeps us at that table. There are things that keep us there, even when we find ourselves in a different place about the ways in which we think about things. So that's what I celebrate. I never feel that you would permanently walk away, that you're going to find a way, to keep, well, at least to keep that conversation open so that we can, and not to let one conversation define the whole relationship that we have, but trying to find ways that we can keep coming together again. I guess your listeners are saying, well, this is mama son, the conversation that we're having. And I want to affirm that because so many people easily walk away rather than to find a way. And that's in our own families, that's in our church families, it's in our community, it's in the context in which we find ourselves in terms of the larger world. And if we are serious about trying to work for the beloved community, how do what are the ways that you do that that can really make a difference in the world? I'm just glad that we've had that relationship and continue to have it as we each. And I celebrate it even more the older I get on this journey, knowing that there are people that are there that I know no matter what I can depend on. And
Yes,
I
ma'am.
celebrate that.
Yes, ma'am. Well, it's significant in that, and so let's do just a little bit of storytelling about who you are and where you've come from. You come out of Norfolk, Virginia. You went to school there, and then you went on to college there. You went to Norfolk State, HBCU, um, and then from there you came up north here for a little bit and did some graduate studies at the then Andover Newton Theological School. And you graduated from there in the early 1960s, and then got involved in religious education and ministry. Went out to Cincinnati for a while, and I've had the great blessing to be in the church where you were serving on the staff as a young whippersnapper. I've seen the pictures when you had on the nice little gloves and the nice little pillbox hat, and it was looking so cute and fresh. I mean. So,
Oh, God, I love
right,
it.
and then your journey took you down to Atlanta,
Yeah.
and you served there in the church, and then rose to the ranks to the national setting of our denomination, the United Church of Christ, at a very significant, pivotal time. Late 60s, early 70s, there was lots of movement. Dr. King had gotten assassinated. It was, Black Power, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, and the rest of the young people was doing their thing. Ambassador Young, who you know very well, was, and Reverend JJ, I call him Reverend JJ, Jesse Jackson Sr., and others were positioning themselves in the immediate aftermath. You got to know James Farmer, and the movement that happened at the God Box, where they kind of did a takeover in the spiritual community. That was the church, universal, the Protestant church. You then ascended from there, and ultimately by the 1980, you became, you were the chief of what we called back then, of our instrumentalities of the office of church in society. You are our chief justice warrior. So Mama, and then I'm leaving off some stuff, but one of the things I want to lift up in this moment, because I think it's interesting, that your work in and around the Black theology group during that period of time, that then was connected to the conversations that were being had. The church was having some conversations, as well as the academy was having some conversation around critical race theory, right? So critical race theory in one setting was a conversation amongst the lawyers in a social context. The church was having conversations about what race meant and how we were gonna arrive at a different place. Could you talk a little bit about that time, that struggle, those periods, that period of time in particular, and maybe make some connections to what we're dealing with today?
Let me also back up a little bit, because you called my mother and father Cora and Marcus Delk. I am one of 7 sisters and brothers, siblings in the family, and I grew up in the 40s. My father, in the early days, dug graves for a living. He did whatever he could to keep the roof over our heads and to make it possible that all of us could, one, come home and have my mother be in that home. That was important to him. And while it probably could have helped if my mother could have worked out with the income, he wanted her there when we came, and having my mother in that home when I came home from school and my siblings came home from school meant everything. And the fact that I had a father who was willing to do whatever he could to make sure that we had that home environment nurturing us, enabling us to become the best that we can be. So I can't even start talking about Black theology without saying how theology is a word about God, and how that word about God flows from the very beginnings. And it was flowing through my mother and my father, who deeply believed that with God all things were possible, that there was a God, and that God had intended for us to live our lives in freedom, in justice, and wholeness. They embodied that in their being. And every day when I got ready to get up and get out of that household, I never left it without prayers over me. I never left it with my mother calling us to the table. Daddy had already gone out, but my mother would call us to the table, and she would pray for each of us by name. And there's something about hearing your name called. When I knew that I was going into that school setting that day, and my mother would ask God to keep my mind focused on what the teachers would be trying to impart to me, or whatever would come to me that day, that God's protection and God's power and spirit would be all around me and all in me and through me. And she would call each of us, not just me by name, but Alethea by name, and William and Marcus and Myra and Margaret. All of us were prayed for in a very intentional way, knowing that when you got the power of the divine working to hold your mind, body, and soul and spirit together, you can make a difference. You can accomplish what you thought was impossible. And in the days of Black theology, which was a word about Jesus Christ coming to set at liberty those who are oppressed, that looking at liberation theology, that the meaning of the gospel was about setting free those who were oppressed, setting free the captive. And so for me, that construct didn't just happen in the 70s when I sat with Jim Cone, or I sat with Cornel West, and all of us were sitting, in Jeremiah Wright, and I was a part of the Black Theology Project. It had been something that had been instilled into me from the time that I was growing up in the home of Cora and Marcus Delk. And I call them theologians because they believed in a God who believed that we ought to live our lives in freedom and justice and equality. And they poured that into our hearts, our minds, and our souls. So I grew up knowing that there was a call on my life. I grew up knowing that I had to, in fact, think about how my life would be used, not just for advancement for myself, but for the liberation of our people. I grew up in the red light district of Norfolk, Virginia, and the red light district was where the poorer folk lived in that. But there was community in that. I knew everybody on that block, and everybody on the block knew me. And they wanted me to achieve as well, to be the best that I could be. So I had a whole community joining with my mother and my father, investing in me and all the young folk who were there to, in fact, become the very best that we could be, because they knew we lived in Norfolk, Virginia, where in the 40s and the 50s, segregation was legal. It was legal to separate the races on the basis of one race being inferior and another race being superior. And if we were to survive already in a nation, I grew up in a Black school, in a Black community, with a Black library, going to the Black movies, I walked, when I got ready to take the bus from my school to downtown to get something for the family or back or so, I'd have to get on the front, put my fare in, get off the bus, and get in the back of the bus in order to ride. It would be 57 before Lesser Heart, Rosa Parks, and then began to fight. But I knew, and they knew from the very moment we were born, that we were going to have to struggle against a system that was in place that would, in fact, continue to try to create a narrative that we were less than equal, that we were not as good as. And so, from the very moment of my whole existence, I had mama and daddy, grandparents. I had my teachers. I'm one of those who said, I'm so glad I went to a black school myself. I'm so glad it was that they didn't legally separate the schools because those black teachers invested in me. Those black teachers believed in me. They took me under their wings, just like they did all of the children at school, because they knew what we were going to face in the world that we were a part of. And they were instilling into us that sense of affirmation about who we were, as was the church that I was a part of as well. And so I had the community, I had the church, I had the school, I had a whole network of folk who were basically saying, we are living in a system that is designed to keep us less than. And therefore, you got a call on your life from the very moment that you, no matter how I chose to live out that call, most of my siblings became teachers, most of them. And my brother, Eddie, that you know, was a lawyer. And then I moved in the field of religion as the avenue by which I would live out my call. But it didn't matter where we were. The teachers, my sisters and brothers who were teachers, had that same call on them. They had to instill into those that they met and that they touched how important it was for them to really invest in themselves, believe in themselves, feel that they were just as good as anybody else, equip them with tools and skills to survive in a nation that would not love them the way that my parents really wanted us to be loved, but they knew that segregation and that racism was so entrenched in the heart of this country and in its psychic that we would be fighting that fight for all of our lives, but we would be equipped not to give up or give out, but to keep on functioning. So sometimes when I think about the fact that I grew up in the red light district of Norfolk, Virginia, with a father who dug graves for a living, however, brought home his resources to a mama who was there to help protect us and nurture us, and that I couldn't just roam around in the neighborhood. I wanted to do what some of the others were doing, but I couldn't because they had expectations on them. And it was for them to create a safe environment that would allow us. So that when I look back at my life over the years that I have been privileged to serve it in so many ways, it's like Maya Angelou said, I wouldn't take nothing for the journey, because it was one that would take me to almost every continent in the world. It was one that would allow me to work with the World Council of Churches as the moderator of the program to combat racism during the 80s and the 90s. It would allow me to be a part of a denomination where I would get to serve as the executive of the Office for Church and Society. I would be in Chicago serving as the executive of an organization that was fighting for justice and wholeness in the context of the world that we are a part. But it started with the mamas and daddies. So to even lightly pass over their names, I can't. So I have to give all honor and glory to both Corey and Marcus Delk, who have been in heaven for quite some time. But what they instilled in my spirit, what they instilled in me, continues to live in the various places. So it was no question for me that no matter where I was, that my agenda was clear. I had to fight against a segregated, racist society that was hell-bent on keeping African Americans as less than. And in every aspect of its systems, that racism prevailed. It was everywhere. No matter where you picked up the rock, you would find that piece on them. So I knew I had a call on my life. It wasn't any question about it. Now, I struggled for a while with religion because, in fact, I was trying to find out what was the best place. And there was a period when I was in college that I decided I wanted to be a social worker. And so my major in college, Norfolk State. Yay, Norfolk State. Behold the green and the gold. But while we are having this conversation, I got to say, our basketball teams and MEAC and all of that have been doing wonderfully well. And our women's teams are just outstanding. Behold the green and the gold. Y'all, I'm excited about that. However, I knew that I was going to have to figure out, what path that I would embark upon, and I really struggled for a while in terms of I knew I didn't want to teach, so that wasn't for me. I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer, and everybody said that the folk used to say God's got God's hands on you because they would see something in you that was about spirit. And folk always felt something in my spirit. Even as a young person, somebody would say, she's got an old spirit in her. You have heard, and I never recognized what they saw that made them think I had an old spirit. But there was something in the way of my being that let them know that there was a direction for my life that was ordained by God. And that's an interesting piece because they began to speak that over me as I was moving through high school because I was very active in the church, doing things in the youth program, in Sunday school, in vacation Bible school, all of the things that were active. And so folk began to feel that there was something in the way in which I functioned that had a divine calling on it. Plus, I had a grandmama and a granddaddy that were both holiness ministers. Now, that could have also been a reality. My father's mother and father were both holiness ministers in the First United Holiness Church of America. And so my father always felt I looked like my grandmother. So just on the basis of how I was looking, felt that my grandmother's spirit was somehow radiant in me in the midst of it. But I was trying to find my own lane, find my own path. I didn't want somebody naming something for me. And God had not quite spoken to my heart, mind, and soul in the same way. And so by the time I got to college, I decided sociology would be my field and psychology would be my minor. And that my goal was to maybe move in the whole field of social work. I was thinking about social being in a place where I could respond to the needs of our people and avenues that might make a difference. And so for the first 3 years that I was at Andover Newton, I mean, not Andover Newton, at Norfolk State, I am recovering from a cold, so don't worry when my voice goes in and out. But the first 3 years, I was very clear. I was going to, in fact, be move forward with sociology. As a matter of fact, my professor in my junior year, Dr. Blue, I never will forget it, indicated that they had given a scholarship for me in my senior year to be an assistant to Dr. Blue, who was the head of the sociology department, and that upon graduation, I would have a 2-year full scholarship paid to Atlanta University School of Social Work. So my path was really becoming clearer to me in college. And I moved through the first 3 years very clear in my mind. Sociology is it. Psychology. I know when I graduate, I got a scholarship already waiting for me. I'm going to Atlanta to work on that. And then in my senior year, another spiritual guide. I've had them spiritual guides come up in my life in strategic moments, which meant I say this, God's yes for my life has been louder than my nose to God. God's yes in my life for the path that God had for me to move was louder than my nose because my nose, I kept coming back with a no, and something would come in my path that would begin to cause me to look at things differently. And my senior year in college, it was Reverend Purcell Austin, who had always been a spiritual guide for me from the time I was young. He was at Franklinton Center in Bricks, one of the youth camps that I used to go to during my teenage years at Franklinton Center every summer. That was sort of like a vacation for all of us young people. We loved doing it, going. And he then began to talk to me about Christian education. But of course, like I said, I'm not wanting other people to define my journey. And so, and my father was already talking about that I look like my grandmother, and I wasn't having that. And so I was really ready to move in a very connecting way in my college years so that everybody would be clear about who I was and what I was going to become. So here I am following my path right up to my senior year. And Purcell has a drop-in session in January of my senior year, and I'm graduating in May. He comes in January. And again, he just has this conversation with me about saying he had always hoped that I might be one of the young women. He said, we got many of the young guys in our churches who have definitely decided they're going into ministry and are preparing for college and then seminary. He said, but this church needs the voice of women, and they need the spirit of women working as well. And I always hope that you might be one of those women. Now, think about this. This is now, I'm into the 50s. This is I graduated. I went to Norfolk State in 1957 and graduated in 61. And so, other than my grandmother, I didn't have any role models that and I didn't want to be my grandmother. She was a very stern woman. She was a wonderful woman, wonderful preacher, but very stern. You had to follow the rules, and so she was too rigid for me, and for me wanting to pattern myself after her. And she died anyway when I was about 12 years of age. But to keep my story going, it was that year, 1961, graduation year at Norfolk State, that Purcell Austin intervened. And he intervened in my spirit by simply saying, I can think of many who will be graduating with a degree in sociology and psychology, but the path less traveled right now is the path of women in faith. And at that point, he was talking more about the Southern Conference of the United Church of Christ and those of us who had come through that Southern Conference. And in that context, there were no women who were saying that either they wanted to go on to pastor a church at that time or to go on to seminary. And so he just said, it had been my hope. And he said, I think that is the field that perhaps can have a major impact on the issues that we are dealing with. And so he just sort of dropped it. And it's like you drop something and you leave it. But now it's dropped in my brain. And I kept thinking about this and I couldn't shake it. It was like so January, I tried to act as if I haven't had this conversation with Purcell. And then I'm into February and I'm still not able to let it go. And so I started talking to my mother about this. And she said, well, maybe you can't let it go because there is something there that is calling you, that is speaking to your heart and your spirit. She said, so let's be in prayer. My mother was a prayer warrior. She said, let's be in prayer about this. And so we were in prayer. So now it's March and I'm still in prayer about this. And now it's April and the graduation is May. Graduation is May. And I went to bed one night and had this unbelievable dream in my senior year of college, almost in the month that I was graduating, but it was in April. And in it, I am surrounded by these strong women. And they are my mother, who is a wonderful prayer warrior, my grandmother that my father had always said I looked like, who had died when I was 12. Mother Tatnall, which was one of the women that my grandmother had touched and was a missionary doing mission work in a number of places. And Mary McLeod Bethune, because she was one that had meaning for me. And those women were in my dream and they were surrounding me. And I'm like in a circle with them sending their spirits to me in the dream. And because I grew up with women, strong women who were spirit women, who felt things through dreams. My mother was a spirit woman who felt things to dream. My grandmother saw things, as people would say. Some people would say they had veils on there, but they were connected to the spirit world and they functioned in that world. And so here I was having this deeply spirit filled spiritual dream that would decide what the rest of my life was going to be about. I came up out of that dream knowing that the call on my life was not going to be sociology, but in fact, a call to follow the faith path. And Purcell, I called in April and said to him, I heard you. And I said, I've been wrestling, we've been praying. And my spirit is at this point that I just can't act as if that is not real for me. So he said, let me do this. Let me send a letter. He had been a graduate. He was a graduate of Andover Newton Theological Seminary in Newton Center, Massachusetts. This is now April, and May is my graduation. My sociology professor has already set it up so that I would leave there and go on to Atlanta University. They were going to award me the scholarship upon graduation, all paid, to Atlanta University. And I had been his assistant for my whole senior year. So he's vested in me. And now here I am with this spirit piece flowing in me based on this conversation I had with Purcell Austin, my spirit guide. And so I say to him, I still don't feel that I can say yes to you when I know I got this path that I can move in terms of sociology. So he said, just hold still for a minute. You keep on your path. He sent the word to Andover Newton, who had already closed out its year for the year September 1961 class that was there. But there was no Black woman in that class. There were a number of African American males there, but not a Black female. So suddenly here, this person who is my spirit guide dropped something in my spirit that changes the order of my whole being in terms of which way my life would flow. And one of the hardest things, and when he sent my name to Andover Newton, they accepted it because this is 1961. The civil rights movement, all of this is underway. They have no Black female. It was almost like it's already done. Almost from the minute that Purcell spoke the word over me, it was almost like the path then had already started to shift into seminary rather than to sociology. And so one of the hardest things I ever had to do, not ever, but I had to do at that time, was to say to Dr. Blue that I had made a decision not to go on to Atlanta University, because by the time May came, I held out until May because I thought for sure Andover Newton would not accept me. I had no money or anything at that point. And here in Atlanta, I got a whole full scholarship paid. And so I trust at that point that if that was the path that God had for me, that door would have to open, the path would have to open. And of course, by the time of the week or 2 weeks before graduation, I already knew that Andover Newton was preparing for me to come to Andover Newton Theological Seminary. And so I moved to Dr. Blue. And I remember he said, well, what in the world do you think you're going to do? I mean, this religion thing wasn't anything that made him think it could have a deep impact on changing the reality that our people lived under day for day. What are you going to do? He said, are you going to stand on the street corner and pass out tracts saying Jesus saves? Is that what you see yourself doing? So again, here I am, a woman functioning in a path, feeling the call on my life, and yet not really able to say what a difference it's really going to make. And yet trusting that it still was a path that I had to embark upon, which was the path that I ended up following. And like I said, for Maya Angelou, I wouldn't take anything for the journey. So, and while I was at Norfolk State, We were right in the student sit-ins. I was a part of all of that. So we were sitting in, and I went to Andover, Newton, and Boston area. We were a part of the Freedom Rides that left to come on back to. And I knew whatever I had to do, it had to position me to, in fact, fight for the justice and freedom of our people in a way that would have us really pushing against a system that was designed to keep us in a posture of being disempowered rather than power. And once you understand you got to fight a system, then you got to ask yourself the question, where are the places where you can effectively do that? And so by the time I graduated from Norfolk, coming from Andover Newton Theological Seminary, the only place that would allow me to come and have a job, because number one, now I'm a Black female in 1963, graduating from Andover Newton. There's not a Black church that in the tradition that I had come out of in the southern part of the United, that was Black churches where Purcell had been a part of. I always thought I would go back and somehow get hired by one of them. Well, most of our pastors had two jobs. They were working in the shipyard and and serving as pastor. Our churches weren't able to afford another person, so nobody could call me to be a director of Christian education, and that was what my degree was. But it was Purcell Austin, my spirit guide again, sending out a word to all of the Black pastors in the United Church of Christ that he felt could afford to hire uh, me as their director of Christian education. And it was Homer McEwen in Atlanta, Georgia, who was teaching at ITC at the time, pastoring. And in that church was Andy Young and Gene Young, who were there. And it's almost as if the path that we are on, when it's in alignment with what God has for you to do, the doors open. Even though you don't see the way, the doors are opening. Purcell drops that bomb in my spirit. I have to change within a moment of months from moving to Atlanta for social work and redirect myself to Boston to be equipped for Christian education, and then end up in Atlanta. It's so funny. I end up in Atlanta at a church which was the result of an agreement between two men. I never interviewed for the job. Purcell got on the phone and called and said, hey, but because I felt I was in alignment with the call of God on my life, and the call for me, I always knew, had to be to oppose unjust systems that were struggling to destroy the lifeblood of our people, that wherever I was going to have to be equipped to do that. So I land in Atlanta, Georgia in 1963 at First Congregational Church, where Andrew Young, working with Dr. Martin King. 2 blocks down the street is SCLC. Dr. King's church, 2 more blocks down the street in the midst of it. I'm sitting right in the heart of equipping and training for the justice work that we had to be about. And I'm able to be mentored in my first job by Andrew Young and Gene Young, who were already deeply connected to the civil rights struggle and the journey that was yet in front of me. So I felt that the path that I was on was being carefully laid out in a way that would allow me to really land in those places where I could be most effective in it, because I felt the hand of God was on my life, opening up the path, turning me around at times, redirecting me, but still. And that's why I said God's yes for my life was larger sometimes than my no, because that led me then to move from there. In 1963, I was in Atlanta for 2 years under the tutelage of Andy and Gene, who helped me in a variety of ways. And we were doing sit-ins. There were many things that were happening at that moment. And the church was looking at the role of the church and being a critical voice in the struggle. And Dr. King, of course, was leading a church movement with pastors and to overcome, looking at nonviolence as the way to win the battle for us in terms of the justice and freedom that we needed. And so for me to be nurtured in the womb of all of that, and then to be one of the few women, I graduated from Andover Newton, the only Black female. At the time when I came out, there were no other Black females who were ordained. I came out in 63. There were no other Black females who were ordained in the United Church of Christ. Now, there were Black women who had created their own churches before the merger of the United Church of Christ. And I stand on the shoulder. So even though I'm called the first Black woman to be ordained, that meant I was the first Black woman who was seminary trained and was a part of a new denomination called the United Church of Christ that came into existence in 57. But there were women all along who had accepted the call of God on their lives and had to fight to create their own churches in a very patriarchy society that we lived in, that had to struggle with that. But I came along at that moment of a new denomination, went to a seminary related to that denomination, and therefore was in a situation sort of by myself, because the women's movement happened in the 70s. And I came in the 60s. That's why my alignment, I was almost standing in a position. Some of the women asked me today, how did you move from step to step to step to step? Well, in a way, I was almost in a place by myself at that time in the 60s. Like I said, there was no other Black females at Andover Newton then. So I stood by, as the only Black female. I graduated as the only Black female. And to be able to move to Atlanta by a gentleman's agreement and hook up with Andrew Young, who now became a mentor, and Jean Young. I want to be very clear, because she really was a wonderful mentor to me in the period that I was there. Only to move from there, and after 2 years, to Cincinnati, Ohio, where I got the opportunity to help be a part of a church that was a white ENR church of the United Church of Christ. We have ENR, Congregational and Christian. They say 4 streams. I'll say something about my book a little later that says, no, there's a 5th stream in it. But this was an ENR church, a German church in Cincinnati area. However, the Germans were moving out because it was inner city. And they were abandoning the inner city, going to the suburbs at that time. And we had sisters and brothers who were coming up from the south, moving into the area. And so we were transitioning a German church that had been a German church for eons into a Black church. And I was a part of a team, a transitional team that was welcoming mothers and fathers and their sons and their daughters into that community, and to be one of the welcoming churches in that community, to really be present with them. And so I end up being in Cincinnati for 4 years. While I am there, Martin King dies. 1968. Martin King, April the 4th. There's some dates that you will always have in your head, and it changes everything. The city went up in flames. The neighborhood went up in flames in the midst of all that was happening there, that ended up with the mayor of the city setting a task force together to begin to look at how we work on race relations in the midst of the moment of killing our prophet Martin, and people's whole hopes in terms of what it meant for us to keep moving when they murdered the prophets, those that guide you and lead you. And here I am now being asked to be a part of a task force with the mayor of Cincinnati to help think about how we work on issues of race in the city of Chicago. So once again, every place that I moved almost had an alignment connected to it in terms of justice, in terms of working for justice. And it was not long because now I'm definitely on the radar of the denomination. It's a new denomination, and they're trying to figure out how they can, in fact, be racially representative in terms of its national staff. Purcell, my uh, spirit guide, was already working on the national staff of in the Christian Education Division. So again, I'm on the radar of all of everything, and so that door opened. So after 4 years in Cincinnati, I get a call to come to to come to National Church uh, to work on the Division of Christian Education. What's so interesting though about this, and I want to tell this story, is that because I'm clear that the role of the church is to work for the justice of our people, work for the freedom of our folk. Salvation and liberation have to be connected. The path that the church serves has to be for the equipping of our systems again to be filled with the vision of the beloved community that God gives us. And that means to live in justice and wholeness, inequality, to fight the system that we're oppressing, and that the church was called. I was clear about that from the time that I was moving and landed in places that just kept equipping me even more. And so, and when I was in Cincinnati, there was a group called NCBC, National Committee of Black Churchmen. And I got invited because I'm one of the few women who is ordained, and I am um, invited to be a part of it. There were 2 or 3 other women, not many of us at that time, but this is again the 60s. But it was there in that meeting at NCBC, National Committee, that I met Jim Foreman. He's at that meeting. I'm in Cincinnati now, but here I am invited to come. And at that meeting, they began to talk about reparations. They talked about, and I never will forget, because there was a big debate about whether or not to, in fact, move to declare reparations to faith-based institutions who were deeply implicated in the system of injustice that and actually through their resources and as well as in their minds as well, and hearts and soul, were also deeply ingrained in racism itself. And so to challenge these systems with saying that you, out of the faith context and out of the faith you proclaim, also have a responsibility to correct the injustices that exist. And Foreman was the one to lead it. This was in 68. I was in that meeting. Coming out of that meeting, I remember we had this wonderful button, and on the button was the fist holding the cross. The power of the cross to break through racism, power of the cross to break through systemic injustice. And think about this. I'm one of the few females sitting in that place, okay? By the time the plan was put into action, I have been called from Cincinnati, where I was a part of, sitting in a part of that. The plan was now in place where Jim Foreman would go to Riverside Church in 1969, which was the first place that he walked the aisle of Riverside up into the pulpit to proclaim the Black Manifesto at that point. And because I had been a part of the others, and by now had been invited to a position with the United Church of Christ in the Division of Christian Education, I land in that position in June of 1969. Jim Foreman has just, in fact, presented the manifesto at Riverside, had gone from Riverside to the church house at 475 Riverside Drive, where they opposed his coming because they knew he had spoken at Riverside, knew he was moving. So they blocked any attempt for him to meet with him or to talk with him in any way. And they sat in. That whole delegation with him sat in, where they were, the police were called and they were forcibly removed from that They went downtown to the offices of the United Church of Christ, where they were met with opposition too, and took out an injunction against Jim Foreman from presenting the manifesto to the United Church of Christ. This happens in June. I arrived in June at the first General Synod, my first General Synod in 1969, at the Park Plaza Hotel in Boston, Massachusetts, where that Synod was being held. And Charlie Cobb and the Commission for Racial Justice at that time had made a decision that this church would not say no to this prophet who had come to it and had taken an injunction out against it. And so they made a decision to invite Jim Foreman to that General Synod. I'm coming in. That's my first act, is to come to that Synod. And I'm going to be presented by the United Church Board as its first Black female who had a program position, not a secretary, but a program. And I'm going to be presented to that Synod. I walk in to that Synod, to the Park Plaza Hotel, ready to sign in for my room and all of that. And there's somebody called Bill Land, who is downstairs in the lobby. Never met Bill Land a day in my life. He walks up to me. He thinks I'm a delegate for some reason. And he says, I'm Bill Land. I said, wonderful. I'm Yvonne Delk. And he says, I am wondering if you are a delegate. I said, oh, no, I'm going to be a staff member. And I'm saying it with such pride, of the Board for Homeland Ministries. He said, be that as it way, you might want to meet with the Black folk. We're going to be meeting upstairs tonight. However much I'm saying who I am and what role I'm going to position myself to, it all came around. And here I had been in the very meeting where the idea had been conceived. And now my path and Jim Foreman's path were converging up in a room in 1969. So rather than to be presented to that General Synod by the executive of the Board for Homeland Ministry, I knew that if Black folk were going to be walking the aisle of that Synod in 1969, when that Synod moved, and to take the stage to keep that Synod from occurring unless unless they lifted the audit, not the audit, but the ban that they had on his coming into the United States, to lift that in order for him to be allowed to speak to that Synod. And so how could you not know that what God plans for you puts you in direct position where you find yourself? So here I am, arriving at the United Church of Christ, one of the first Black females for a program position, and discovering that Jim Foreman is upstairs. So we go up, and of course, the next day, there's no question what I do. I'm walking the aisle with Jim Foreman. I don't care what they call me to do. I'm walking the aisle with Foreman, who's walking the aisle, and by Charlie Cobb and all of the ones who were there. And we go up on the stage and we occupy the stage over that Synod, refusing to let the Synod began until the legal injunction, had been removed from it. When God has a call on your life, and you know that there is a call that has already been instilled into you from the time you were born by your parents, that this unjust system means that whatever gift we've got, you've got to use it to really dismantle that system in order for the beloved community. As the pieces line up, it's almost unbelievable. And so here I am in 1969, standing on that stage with Jim Foreman. And I knew then that I was introducing myself about what I said. It doesn't matter. There's an African proverb. It says, it doesn't matter what they call you. It's what you answer to that's important. And so they were going to call me a number of things. They had a whole long title that they would be calling me as this new Black female coming into the system. But what I would be answering to was the call for justice, the call for freedom. And I would be aligning myself with the movement for that. And Charlie Cobb and Ed Edmonds and all of those men and women who had been already there. I mean, they had been there in the early 60s, beginning to fight this and push this denomination to take a stand for justice. So the call was being realized in that way. And by the time the Black Theology Project came into being, we were already on a road of justice in the context. And so it was almost like a continuation, and it was a part of the theology in the Americas that the National Council of Churches, in fact. And the question was, what is the role of the church in the midst of unjust systems? What is the role of faith in the midst of unjust systems? And how does one, in fact, posture oneself with whatever gifts or skills that you have to really be able to become a part of a movement to disempower, to dismantle a racist system that is in existence? And so the theology in the Americas and the Black Theology Project became yet one piece of that, a continuation of that. When there is a call on your life, I've always asked myself this: what is it that defines who you are, that will have binding authority for your life, no matter where you go, what you do, that
Oh,
can no longer deny? It is, in fact, intricately connected to your being, to your reason for being in the midst of it. Who tells you who you are and ways that you're not able to walk away from? And the fact that at every step that I felt my call was in line with God, the doors kept coming together in sync with it, step by step, by step. And it allowed me then to be in places where not only could I speak a word, but I was with others who were already working to dismantle it and across denominational lines. That's the other thing I've been grateful for in my life, is that my journey took me out of boxes. You can get so caught up in a box that you only see what's in that particular orbit. But I've been blessed to be able to work across the walls, across the lines that divide us, ecumenically working with other sisters and brothers. When I was in Cincinnati and Dr. King died and the city went up in flames, I found myself sitting at a table set by the mayor that had men and women from various segments sitting there across denominational lines, across also the lines of different ways of functioning in the city. So I wasn't just sitting with faith leaders, I was also sitting with political leaders at that table across the lines. And so to be a part of a journey that allows the table to be a broader table that you're a part of. So I end up, because of my work on justice in the denomination that I had walked into with Jim Ford, because Jim Foreman, and as a result of Jim Foreman being able to speak to that General Senate, what was then a committee to work on racial justice was voted to become a commission, an intricate part of the life of that denomination, if it was going to be true to its calling. And when it came into existence, it said it wanted to come because it felt that religious bodies ought to be united. Union is a part of it, united. But it also said that it came together to work for the unity of all humankind. Denominations coming together to work together so that all of humankind can live with justice and wholeness in the thing. But you still had to hold that denomination to its, fundamental. And so I knew that my coming in didn't matter what they assigned to me. I already had an assignment that had been given to me from the day I was born. I already had an assignment that had been carefully etched in terms of what I would have to stand for. And so to be able then to work across boundaries, across the barriers from the UCC with the National Council of Churches. National Council of Churches does this whole thing with pedagogy of the oppressed, Paulo Freire, and the whole liberation theology and the Black theology and all. So then the networks and I'm in a right position. I'm there. I'm already in a position. So I find myself sitting with Jim Cone, my Lord, the father, Black theology and Black power. He had coined that in 1969 with that first book, Black theology and Black power. And then in the 70s, we set up a whole setting in which I'm able to not only think about it in a cognitive way, but sit at a table where we got to work out a strategy for how we practically work that theology. And it was interesting because, again, you had at the level of the defining what the issues were, theologians that were coming from the academy. But you had folk in the hood each and every day who were working on issues of injustice. And you had the Black church. So you had the theologians, which were the thinkers, so to speak, who were in the seminaries teaching, writing, and Jim Cone and Cornell were a part of that group. But then you had pastors who were working in churches, in communities that were also working on that issue. And then you had activists who were day for day for day working in the communities to dismantle that. And our issue was how to bring all three together in the Black Theology Project, the theologians, the activists, the Black church, because a component of all those were in all of the pieces of it. And for a while, the folk who were the theologians weren't necessarily sitting in our churches. And the folk who were in our churches weren't necessarily on the corners with the activists. We were too separate. And so the idea was how to bring, and I just happened to come along at a time where you can be a part of an ongoing movement that allows you to, in fact, offer your gifts and your skills. But you got to know what your design calling is, what your purpose is. And when you know that, wherever you position yourself, you know what the call on your life and the call on your gift is in the midst of it. So when I think about it, a grave digger's daughter is empowered by a spirit that he holds that was in his mama and daddy, and from a mother who was a part of a spiritually connected group of women, poured their spirits into the path that I would be on, that would allow me to continue to move with that and to offer that in all of those different places that I've had. And it's been an amazing, amazing journey. And it may be kind of rattling on, but I wanted you to see the trajectory of your life. And what I'm saying, basically, when your life is in sync with what you believe is the call on your life, for the purpose, a noble calling, for the purpose of the liberation of our people. And when you understand that, however you land, you know what it is that you're going to be about in terms of enabling the gift, the particular gift you have, to be a part of working with that. And it's for us, I mean, when we sit in the year of our Lord 2023, and we look at where we've come from the moment in 1619, I'm sitting right here in Virginia, where in 1619, right up the street, their mamas and daddies landed. And you ask yourself the question, 400 years, that shows you how entrenched the system is. But as entrenched as that system is, we've got to be the freedom fighters. We've got to be the ones who are definitely entrenched in another way of living and existing and being. And I've just been so grateful that I've been able to be on a journey that put me in touch with those who were on that same path. And I stand on their shoulders. When I think about all of the mothers and fathers, when I think about the Shirley Chisholms, when I think about Rosa Parks and Martin, when I think about all the sheroes and heroes that continue to invest in this journey of freedom, their spirits resonate with my spirit. I live in sync with that spirit of wholeness and justice and freedom for our nation. And I'm determined to find a way each and every phase of our life to keep that going. So what has been wonderful has been the ability to now, in my senior year, to write about a part of that history. And that is the history of them first, them African mothers and fathers who stepped out of the cotton field with an understanding that if they were going to be surviving in this nation, that they had to have faith. If they were going to survive, they were going to have institutions that would work for the survival of our people. Schools were important. They didn't even want us to learn how to read or write, but they came up. The Black church was our sacred space. It was our free space. It's not so much there in many places now, if you ask me about where we're going on this religious journey, because, we get to the point that the institution becomes the reality rather than the spirit of the movement. We protect in institutions and ideologies rather than to create a movement for change, to be a part of a movement. And wherever I've been trying to be a part of that movement for change. And when I talk about not being in a situation where we box ourselves in, where we live in the boxes, where the faith becomes a doctrine and not a movement, a verb for the changing, where we create in those faith places some of the same divisions that have kept us faction, where we have patriarchy that exists to oppress women in the midst of those systems. The systems become a part of that same systemic evil that allows some to have more value and worth than others. And when I think about where we are now with our same gender loving, with where we are in terms of our trans sisters and sons and daughters, when I think about how they've had to create their own path because the churches have closed down in relationship to their ability to be able to affirm and to celebrate and to embody them as family in the midst of it. When the very systems that you're a part of become the very issues and problems that keep the oppression, then you got to find a way that you can move out. And so I'm grateful that I've always found a way to be a part of the movement, not to get so institutionalized into a closed entity that in fact closes in on itself with doctrines and becomes an example of that which we are even wrestling against in the midst of the world that we've been a part of. So it's been a wonderful journey to be a part of that movement. And what I did from the time that my journey unfolded, first with my own parents, then with the spirit guides that have moved along my way, then with the possibilities that have opened up where I could really be in sync with God's call on my life. I feel like I've been in those places where I really can and can continue to make a difference. And now, son, I like, there was a moment I used to like people calling me the Reverend Doctor, because I had achieved a position, and especially with those men who wanted to call me sister all the time. And I wanted to say to them, I'm sorry, I don't answer to that. I answer to the Reverend Dr. Yvonne Delk. But now I'm at another point, and I'm at that point where I answer to Elder Mother. I answer to relationship, and it's my role now to pass on what I've learned to you, to the others who are coming after me, to make sure that we tell the story, to get that story, because our story is such a powerful story of a people resisting and fighting and struggling to create that world that God intends for us to create, and have built systems that are in place and have planted seeds that are so important for us to continue to build on. And so I want to be the storyteller now. I want to be. I functioned so many years as the organizer, as the part of being out there in the movement. But now I want to be the inspiration for the younger generation that's coming. I don't want them to get lost because they don't know that they have their story. I want them to know that there is something that they can answer to, and what that is, and enabling them to be the very best that they can be. And thank God, the first book, Afro Christian Convention, and the fifth stream of the United Church is about Black spirituality, African spirituality that has flowed through us as a people, enabling us to survive. And people say, how did you survive it? How did you? Because we were connected to a taproot that enabled us to survive, that we can connect all the way back to the motherland of Africa. And so to be able to be a part of enabling that to move, to be sitting with Franklinton Center at Bricks, 250 acres of land that we are now continuing. And that is because of the mothers and fathers who stepped out of cotton field and out of shackles into a place of freedom and justice. And we have that freedom space where groups come to the organize for justice and freedom, where ministers come to the organize for justice and freedom, where we're telling the story of who we are, and where we're using acres to help feed people in a food desert in the midst of freedom land and freedom space, and to be a mother guide in spirit that sits in the midst of that, as well as looking at how I can continue to be a support and mentor to the sisters and brothers who come after me is amazing. I probably have run on. You should have you should have interrupted me because when I start talking, it just keeps kind of flowing. But you get a sense of what I'm saying.
Absolutely, Mama. You know I wasn't going to interrupt you. You were channeling what I would call direct spirit touch. Y'all see why I love her. Her ability to create the narrative. Obviously, you're gonna have to come back because you just got us to the 70s. You ain't got it. We ain't did the journey after that where I come along. And so, one, thank you, Mama. Thank you for gifting us with this channel of direct spirit. Your story is fascinating, and so the next time you come in, it's going to be soon. We'll get a date locked in to get you back where you talk about the struggle toward ordination. That was a whole that you talk about getting ordained, but we had to get you to ordain because the literal way was that you go into a church and you're ordained vis-a-vis a church, and how a number of churches in your conference had to come together to call you to a national work. We'll talk about that later. Then we'll talk about your work in not just down south and in some of these other places. You went to Chicago and had to be the leader at the helm of this 100-year-old organization that had moved differently in the world and call it to shift a bit. And so we got, and then what you've done, the lifetime of work that you've done since your retirement. I want to just say this right here. Ebony Magazine, I came to join the team at your invitation. You made space for me at the Community Renewal Society. And in the fall of that same year, I come to join you. You were lifted up by Ebony Magazine as the 1/15th of the 15th greatest Black women preachers. Mm-hmm. So you think I'm gonna stand in the way and interrupt you from your narrative and how you want to tell your story? Absolutely not. I am godly proud that I'm connected to you at a space that is divinely ordered. Your presence in the world has shifted and changed lives, and I'm honored to say you my mama in the midst of that, and to claim a root that folk who know you know I'm related to you. You know, that it's different than people that don't know you. Say, oh, that's nice. But the people who know you and know me know we are connected. This is great. This is fabulous. I want to thank you. And of course, we got to talk about the book. We're going to spend some time talking about the book, and talking about this, the fifth strand. I have, look, I won't even get started because that'll get us down another whole road. We'll be on here. And I also know that it's kind of you don't stay up all night. You goes on the bed and get that beauty rest.
You know, I'm usually in bed. I'm a morning person.
So again, thank you, Mama. Thank you for spending just a little bit of time with this son. And I wanna ask God choicest blessing and richest blessing on you as you continue to mentor us and storytell. What I am finding that many of us don't know these stories. They exist in spaces and places, disconnected from the tap root of our wholeness. And
Right.
so it's part of our job now to
Right.
do that kind of storytelling. Gather us, gather folk, gather us across the many differences that we have, and we come into spaces and places where we can do that reasoning together, that praying together, that communing together. I believe it is what Martin called the beloved community. It is across those kinds of different sociological, religious, geopolitical. It is at that space where we can come together and reason, and then get a word from the Spirit, and the spirits that convene us together, and then go forward to create a better world. And that's what you have lived out for me, and lived out for us. Thank you for being here. We're gonna get you back real soon. Don't y'all worry. We got more to tell about this great woman of God, and this
And
champion.
John, maybe in the next one we can be more intentional about pausing at each moment to say, what was the issue? How did we deal with that issue? And what impact does it have on us now for
Yes.
trying to move through? Because at every level that we had to struggle to break through that system, at every level, whether it was my becoming ordained and the struggle that we had in terms of ordained, but it was a struggle about women, and it was a struggle about how we understood women and the role of women in the context of the church at that particular time as we kept moving, or the issues that we faced when we were with the Black Theology Project, because I was beginning to say a little bit about it in terms of when you have differences in terms of who's at the table, it can disrupt the success of what you're trying to do in the broader communities. And so until we could have the activists and the pastors and those who were in the seminary coming to a common table to wrestle together and figuring out how. So at the next level, maybe we look back to say, what did we learn from that? And what impact do we think that has on where we are today as we continue to try to move forward?
Yes, ma'am. We're going to do just that. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you all for listening. And thank you all for who will listen to this in its archived space and place.
I thought we only had an hour. I'm shocked that we went all this long.
All right.
Oh my God, I didn't realize that it was almost an hour and a half.
That's all right. This is good stuff. And this will be here for as long as these spaces exist, so that people can check in and check out and hear from, not sourcing it from second and third, removed sources. Right? You were there when it was happening.
Yeah.
Right. You were there when it was happening. And so that's, this is what we call in the academy primary source work. Right. This is, you're getting it right there. This primary source. I appreciate you, Mama. And thank you. Love you. Love to the fam. And love to you all who are listening and watching us. We'll see y'all again real soon. All right. Peace.